Okay, guys, this is the last day for Gilded Progressive Era, and we're going to talk a little bit about the suffrage for women. These are your, not by no means all of them, but some of your key players in the suffrage movement for women. This was called NASA, the National Women's Suffrage Association, and Susan B. Anthony, Amelia LBloomer, Carrie Chapman Catt, Elizabeth Cady, Katie Stanton, and Alice Paul were all major players in pushing for an amendment to allow. This is Amelia LBloomer, and she was campaigning. She liked to ride a bicycle, and remember, women wore those long dresses and skirts, came down to the floor, and it was uncomfortable. So she actually designed. She called them Turkish trousers under a shorter skirt and made it easier for her to ride that bicycle. And she was ridiculed for that. As a matter of fact, some people thought it was scandalous. These are going to be called. This is what her bloomers look like. And you can see that they were still covered, but it was considered quite risque.
Other progressive women concentrated on another moral issue, one that had plagued the nation since the Reconstruction days following the Civil War: suffrage, the right for women to vote.
1912. All along Fifth Avenue, from Washington Square to 57th, were gathered thousands of men and women of New York. Women doctors, lawyers, architects, artists, actresses, sculptors, waitresses, domestic and industrial workers, all marched with an intensity and purpose that astonished the crowds that lined the street.
Founded in 1890, the leaders of the National American Women's Suffrage Association used three different approaches to try to win the vote for women. First, they attempted to get state governments to grant them suffrage, but only Wyoming, Utah, Colorado, and Idaho agreed. Suffragettes then decided to take their cause to court, citing the 14th Amendment. It said that states which denied their male citizens the right to vote would lose congressional representation. Women argued that they were citizens too, and therefore the states must allow them to vote. So, Susan B. Anthony and other women made over 150 attempts to vote in 10 different states, forcing the Supreme Court to decide their case. But despite the fact the Supreme Court in 1875 agreed that women were citizens, they concluded that citizenship alone did not automatically grant women the right to vote. Their third approach was to rally support for a constitutional amendment granting suffrage. Time and again, the Senate defeated it. The suffrage campaign marched on, and with America's entry into World War I in 1917, the tide seemed to be turning. Leaders of the women's movement redoubled their efforts. Susan B. Anthony and Carrie Chapman Catt continued the NAWSA's cautious approach, while other women leaders, such as Lucy Burns and Alice Paul, formed a more radical organization, the National Women's Party, which openly blamed the Democrats and used protest marches and even hunger strikes to try to win the vote. Finally, in 1919, Congress approved the 19th Amendment, and the following year the states ratified it, granting women's suffrage. The long battle for suffrage had taken 72 years.
Now let's talk about the amendments to the Constitution of the United States. The 16th, the 17th, the 18th, and the 19th. These are considered the progressive amendments. Income tax, direct election of senators, prohibition, and votes for women. So these from 1913 to 1920, these are considered the progressive amendments. You had the progressive presidents with Theodore Roosevelt, Taft, and Wilson. Now you've got the progressive amendments. It's important to know these amendments. Now you've got 13 through 19. Remember, 13, 14, and 15 are our civil rights amendments. Good way to remember that: free citizens vote, 13 frees the slaves, 14 citizenship with equal protection under the law, and 15 men, especially black men, get the right to vote. Okay, so know these 4 new amendments. Know that 16 through 19 are the progressive amendments. This is the progressive umbrella, okay? So when we talk about progressivism and the progressive era, know that it touched every part of American life: politics, moral, social, economic. Reform was everywhere. The government became active finally and passed laws to protect people, and it became more about people and the public interest instead of those robber barons. This was both political parties. It was defined by middle-class movements. So this was not a rich movement. This was not the poor. These were regular people that were fighting for these rights, levels of government. So some other reforms you might want to make note of: workman's compensation. If you get hurt on the job, now people actually got compensated for it. The laws for women in Muller versus Oregon, they said that women were a little bit more dainty and needed a shorter work hours than men. And so instead of working them 14, 16 hours a day, I think it went down to 10. And then remember we talked about Florence Kelley pushing for child labor laws, and she got them. Age must be 13, over 13, to get a job in any kind of factory work. All right, so social reforms did not include help for immigrants, government help for blacks. We did have the NAACP, we did have W.E.B. Du Bois and Booker T. Washington, Ida B. Wells fighting for an anti-lynching law, but no actual laws are going to be passed. Birth of a Nation was a racist film. The NAACP is going to boycott it, but it was the first feature-length film. We did have another movement called the Temperance movement, which will result in the 18th Amendment. This is Frances Willard, and she is going to be a part of the WCTU, the Women's Christian Temperance Union. And they did have some valid points. We'll talk about this more when we
From Ken Burns and Lynn Novick, it was exactly what America wanted, and it caught us completely by surprise. It turned citizens into criminals and criminals into kings. It changed the very nature of our democracy. Twice. Prohibition.
What a stupid idea it was that people actually thought you could get away with this. That you could actually ban alcohol, completely eliminate its usage in American society. It's a preposterous idea.
Virtually every part of the Constitution is about expanding human freedom, except prohibition, in which human freedom was being limited. And we get in trouble.
It was a struggle between small towns and big cities, the wets and the dries, with the whole country caught in the middle.
It's not that sin is so terrible, it's that sin is very attractive. And that's why we're always tempted to do it. So what you need then is to help people. And if necessary, sometimes you have to make sin illegal. What it would mean in practice was going to have to be worked out through the legal system. Because to pass a law in the real world means nothing. To enforce the law means everything.
You drank to show that you were a man, but you get drunk and all of a sudden you can't provide for your family, you can't do your job.
It was a time when women found their voice and helped to change the nation.
The women gather in front of a saloon and they start praying. And the movement takes off like wildfire.
And our greatest heroes were also our greatest criminals.
You cannot legislate morality. In legislating and attempting to legislate morality, you create opportunities for people who do not follow the law.
Some call it bootlegging, some call it racketeering. I call it a business.
It fueled the Jazz Age, and made the 20s roar.
It was the beginning of the time when boys and girls slept together. There was quite a lot of that going on, which astounded me from my innocent background.
Discover the true story of America's great experiment.
There was a myth of the person who breaks the law when it's a stupid law to give people what they want. Once the government begins forbidding things, then somebody will come along and say, I got it. Step around the corner.
Don't miss the new film from Ken Burns and Lynn Novick, Prohibition, coming this fall, only on PBS.
Okay, so there was a tug of war over this issue, but it is going to pass. And this is the only amendment to the Constitution, the 18th, that will be the 21st. This was a popular temperance slogan, lips that touch liquor shall never touch mine. Carrie Nation, she was a symbol for the Temperance Union. She carried a Bible in one hand and an axe in the other. And she looks formidable, doesn't she? And she would go into the bars and break them up. She would break up those bottles, and she does look like a tough old broad there.